Welcome to the Snowbirds Expat Radio Podcast, powered by the Snowbird US Day Tracker app. I'm your host, Gerry Scott, and my goal is to give you answers to your cross-border questions, to ease the stress of a cross-border move or extended trip, and to keep you up to date on all you need to know with cross-border rules and regulations. Now let's get on with the show. Hello everybody, it's Gerry Scott here, your host of the Snowbirds Expat Radio Podcast. I'm here today with Julia Herzog from Victoria, BC, which is my home island, which, as mentioned before, I grew up in Hewlett, and Julia lives in the town that so much of us would love to have lived in, Victoria, because it's such a beautiful city. So today's podcast is very time sensitive. There's so much going on, Julia, with Canadians going down south and all the restrictions they're hearing about and being worried about. And I know, Julia, you did a presentation to a bunch of immigration lawyers back in the middle of May. So Julia is here to give us an update. I've got some great questions for her. But before I ask those questions, Julia, tell us more about yourself. And we're ready. We want to hear this and we want to learn.
Sure. Well, I'm an immigration lawyer, obviously, and I practice both U.S. and Canadian immigration. I help small businesses, professionals, families be reunited on both sides of the border. I particularly like helping tiny businesses head over to the U.S. to open up, do some cross-border trade. But I also love just basically all kinds of cases. And I'm a member of the American Immigration Lawyers Association. So I'm licensed in New York, which allows me to do federal jurisdiction law across the United States. And I'm a member of the licensed member of the Law Society of British Columbia, which also allows me to do federal jurisdiction, that is immigration, citizenship, those types of cases across Canada. So I'm originally a New Yorker, and I like to say that I went from the hustle and bustle of New York to the lovely city of Victoria, and especially enjoy the outdoors. And so I'm going to take one moment, an important moment, to indicate that I wish to acknowledge and respect the Lekwungen peoples on whose unceded traditional territory I live and work, and the Songhees, the Esquimalt and Wasanich peoples, whose unrelinquished historical relationships with this land continue to this day. And I like to make sure that everybody hears that I'm very grateful for the opportunity to live on this land and to share this land with those peoples, and this is a great opportunity to raise my children and teach my grandchildren to cherish and protect these lands.
Well, that is important, as mentioned. I mean, growing up on the island, we understand the importance, especially when you're in a little town like Hewlett and all the neighboring indigenous towns that we got to know all these kids that we grew up with. So very important. Now, before I ask you these questions, can you tell me a little bit more about your presentation that you did in front of all these immigration lawyers in the middle of May?
Well, I'm a member of the Canadian Bar Association BC branch, and we all spend time learning on different topics and then sharing that information with each other. So it was my turn, so to speak, to give a presentation, and I chose something that I thought was going to be relevant, since I'm speaking with Canadian immigration lawyers who advise people going into the United States. I thought we ought to know more about some of the events that have happened in recent days, and specifically, they noticed that Canada updated its U.S. travel advisory, saying, explaining some new rules about the Canadians having to register in the United States and be registered. And I gave basically a teaching on that subject, on the details.
Well, I'm going to ask that question. So what is Canada's recent travel advisory to the U.S.? What is it?
Well, Canada, basically the government of Canada said Canadians and other foreign nationals visiting the United States for periods of longer than 30 days must be registered with the United States government. So it means that basically it's based on one of the executive orders. So on January 20th, 2025, President Trump issued Executive Order 14159, which directed the Department of Homeland Security to ensure that aliens, that is, non-citizens, comply with their duty to register with the government. So it's a basic requirement that actually existed already in the law, but the Department of Homeland Security was thus directed by this executive order to start enforcing that law.
No, I think this is where it's confusing for a lot of us Canadian snowbirds that do go down south. Aren't we already registered if we have things like a Nexus, or we go across the border, we're issued I-94s? Aren't we already registered in that sense?
Well, you may be, and I'll give you some more details on that. I just wanted to also clarify something that I feel is important to understand, that this is a 1940 law. And so historically, this law has not been enforced. So we don't actually know what is going to happen with this law or with the enforcement of this law right now. But just to go on to say, okay, who qualifies as being registered? You are correct that if you go across the border as a Canadian to go visit, that you may or may not be given what they call an I-94. The I-94 used to be, and many of us who've been back and forth across this border over the many years would have been familiar with a paper I-94 that was put in your passport. But now it's electronic, and they don't always tell you that you've been issued it. So you don't know whether you've been issued this I-94. The I-94 itself tells you how much time you're allowed to stay in the U.S. if you're not a citizen. So if you're a Canadian going over a land border, they may or may not register the I-94. If you're going via air, they usually do have an I-94.
So this is where the confusion has been, even long before this 1940-ish law was kind of brought to everybody's attention in January this year. A lot of folks went online and they couldn't find their I-94. And if they can't find it, what can they do to determine that an I-94 does exist?
Well, to start with, when you go over the border, so since Canadians are visa exempt, they don't need to apply for a visa. At the border, you just usually show your passport, and then, matter of fact, if you're not a visa holder, you'll be permitted in generally for a maximum of 6 months in a 12-month period. If you're having a trouble with your status and you haven't been issued a 994 and you don't know what to do about it, you might want to give me a call. But what you can do is you can, when you're on your way over, especially at a land border, you can say to the officer, hey, I just want to make sure that I'm going to get an I-94 issued because I'm planning, you can see they ask you, how long are you planning on staying? And if you say, well, I'm going to my place in Florida for 3 months, that I usually go, I'm a snowbird, and I usually go for 3 months to Florida in the middle of the winter. That's what I'm hoping to do. You're always asking permission when you get to the border for admission, because as of right, Canadians don't have a right to enter the U.S. We're always asking permission. But you can also say, look, I just want to make sure that I'm registered properly. I understand that the I-94 is proof of that. Could you help me with that? You can also ask for a stamp on your passport. If the rule is that if you're going to be in the U.S. for 30 days or more, you need to have this. And then hopefully the I-94 is registered and you can go online to the I-94 site, and you can print out your I-94 and carry it with your passport. Because it's not only that you're required to register, you're also required for people ages 18 and over are required to carry that registration or the proof of registration with them.
Now, when this, a lot of folks were concerned there was a website which allowed people to go on and get registered for it. I think a lot of snowbirds, which demographically would be a little bit older, they're intimidated about going onto these websites and disclosing all their information. Would they be better off just applying for a Nexus pass? Would that be the safest and easiest thing for them to do?
I think it's very personal. And I don't know about safest. Nexus is it's if you're worried about sharing your information with the U.S. government, and Nexus requires a great deal of information from you. It's a personal choice. Nexus does have a cost. I think Nexus depends on how frequently you cross the border, whether you want that status. The I-94. Now I'm wondering if you're thinking also about the form G325R, I think it's called, because there is another way of getting registered that I'm not necessarily recommending. But if you, for example, perhaps you're in Hawaii and you know you're going to be there longer and you really want to make sure you're registered, there is a way of creating an account with my USCIS and then filling out a form G325. I have it written down somewhere, but it's it's very obvious what it is. If you make that account, the problem with that form is it's quite extensive. It asks you for a lot of information. It asks you for, X number of years of work history, address history. You have to go in and give your fingerprints. This is not a requirement for Canadians. Aren't required to have their biometrics or fingerprints taken if you're just going over the border as a tourist for a visit. It's more of if you're a Canadian and you want to be proactive before you leave, you can just make sure that you try to get that I-94 at the border when you go. So you have to be aware that this is something that's needed. And there are criminal and civil penalties for not being registered. So it is not a trivial issue.
So the average Canadian that's been going back and forth, getting their I-94s issued every time and knowing how much time they can spend in the country under their B2 visa, the visitor visa, a lot of those folks don't have to worry then because in theory they're already registered, correct?
If they have what status?
When you go across is a B2 visa. Just the
well,
visa.
if you have gone across as a visitor, yes, you don't. It's not a visa because Canadians are visa exempt.
Yeah.
You have to make sure that you've been issued an I-94 as a visitor. And that's the thing that proves that you are registered. If you're going over because you actually have applied for a more extensive status, that is a visa, which most visitors are not required visas, but if you're something beyond a tourist or a business or a brief business visitor and you need a visa, like say you have a trait E1 or E2, you are registered.
Yeah.
Or if you have an H1B, you are registered. You already know about this. So, yeah.
Do you find that, has there been, are you getting a lot of phone calls with concerned snowbirds going down south? And have you seen an uptick in things like the E2 visa?
Well, the E2 visa is for people who are actually conducting business in the United States. So if you're conducting business in the United States, I strongly recommend, if one is, that they get a status and not just willy-nilly conduct business in the United States. Perhaps there's a greater awareness that something ought to be done and one shouldn't be quite so casual. What I'm witnessing is more on the tourist side, I'm witnessing, because I cross back and forth by car to Seattle from Victoria. I take the ferry and then I drive over to Seattle, and I'm noticing that the border is unusually quiet in both directions. Usually at this time of year, I'm terrified to go out over the land border. I think I'm going to be waiting online for over an hour, and it's not been the case.
Yeah, and I think we're seeing every aspect of when I talk to cross-border accountants and Canadians selling their properties, there is a fear out there that, this rule, like you said, was established in the 1940s, has really got people concerned with all the confusion. And of course, that's why we want people to reach out and call Julia, if you have any questions whatsoever. So one of the questions we had here is, what other options for registration other than the online form? What can they do?
Well, first of all, if you already have a status in the U.S., so this is really for tourists, So for tourists, like I said, there's the online registration option, with getting the G325R and getting my USCIS account. And then there is the request that you get issued an I-94 at the time of admission. The I-94 is evidence of your registration. There is a website. It's a Department of Homeland Security website. If you Google I-94 and Department of Homeland Security, you'll get to that website. You put in your name, you put in your passport number and your date of birth, and you can see if you've been issued an I-94 and then feel reassured perhaps. But do print it off. If you do have the I-94, you should print it off and carry it with you. I don't know if I've answered your question.
Well, you have. And here's a thought that kind of came into my thought process here. Why all the noise? Is there a real concern that a lot of these snowbirds are working remotely for 3 or 4 months of the year? And that kind of leads me into the next question regarding your devices when you go across the border. What right do they have to go into your computer, go into your phone, etc.?
Yeah, I'm not going to theorize about why this is all happening. It's sort of well beyond the scope of my own wisdom.
Okay.
I'm perplexed and distraught. I know that, it's sad. For example, I think I heard somebody told me that Bellingham, Washington has reached out to Canada and in the saying, hey, please come see us. We want you. We're not going to be mean to you Canadians. We miss you. And, I think Canadians miss the Americans too. We are a population that has a huge number of cross-border marriages, cross-border relationships of all sorts, and this is just sad. That's the way I feel about it. Now, about electronic devices, this is an important question. Okay. The U.S. Customs and Border Protection has the authority to search electronic devices, including phones, laptops, tablets, and other electronic devices of anyone entering the United States, including U.S. citizens and non-citizens. Actually, it's the same at the Canadian border too. Okay, so your phone is not a private thing. Okay, so they have two kinds of searches in the United States. They have a basic search, which basically looks at the contents of the device, and then they have an advanced search. The advanced search is when an officer connects to external equipment and to access more in-depth information about your advice. They can only do that if they have a reasonable suspicion of a violation of law or a national security concern. But they can look at your device as is, and they can ask you for your password to your device. And you have a choice about whether you want to give them your device and give them your password. But if you're not a citizen, they may not let you in. They probably won't. And if you are a U.S. citizen, it's just going to make things take a lot longer.
Just to add to your story about these border towns and how they're asking for Canadians to, we miss you, we want you back, please come and see us, spend your money. We recently went on a cruise for my wife's 60th birthday, and we flew to the UK, end up in Southampton, and then did all the Scandinavian countries. As soon as I said I was from Canada, the amount of Americans, the first thing that came out of their mouth was, "We are sorry. We are sorry that you're going through all this craziness with the current administration." And I found a real twist because a Canadian word has always been sorry. We're known for saying sorry, if we do something overly aggressive. But I just could not, like I say, this is a personal story, that the amount of Americans that are almost embarrassed with what's going on, regardless if you're Republican or a Democrat, they really are feeling this push for everything, may it be tariffs or whatever it may be. They're apologizing, which I found, I say, hey, listen, we love Americans. There's no problem with us. So you've answered my question. They can search your phone, and the best thing is just to let them do it. And I've been driving back and forth myself for actually my first time in Maui was 1981. And I go across quite often, flying back and forth. And yes, we do have a visa to if we decide to exit Canada one day and move to Maui full time. We've prepared that. But I've never ever asked for my phone or my computer. Maybe I just look like a good Canadian person, and I've educated to smile all the time and one-word answers. But you're right. I guess the other question we have is that for some folks that have company computers and all this information is personal data on it, it doesn't matter. Not personal data, but could have other clients' data on that computer. Doesn't matter. They asked, you have to provide.
Yeah, there's they can't go onto the cloud. So there's ways of kind of saying, okay, I have private data. I want to protect my privacy, which everybody has a personal right to privacy. It's just not at the border, right? You have possible things that you can do. So 10 smart steps to protect your data. 1, travel light. Carry only necessary devices. You can consider using a dedicated travel device with minimal personal data on it. Back up before you go. That's a second step. 3rd, prioritize password security. So enable two-factor authentication whenever possible to add a layer of security. 4, know your rights. Like I said, you're not required to share your password, but refusal may lead to some problems. Not being admitted, even seizure of the device. U.S. citizens, again, can refuse to answer questions beyond identity and travel details, but this also can cause delays. Lawful permanent residents also cannot be denied entry, but also may face additional scrutiny. Visa holders may be denied entry if they refuse to answer questions. A fifth step you can take is to document the search. So write down details of the search, names and badge numbers of the CBP agents. Document the questions they ask. 6th step, minimize stored data. 7th, encrypt your devices. 8, here's one that I like, turn off your devices before going to the border, because there is possibility of remote data access. I'm not a tech person, but these are beyond my knowledge, but I'm aware that it is possible that you could be sitting at the border waiting online and sending WhatsApp messages, and that those could be potentially intercepted. I'm not sure. I'm not a tech expert. Inspect your devices if they are seized from you. Inspect them. And limit cloud access. So you can save your data in the cloud. You don't have to have your data on your property in your hands.
So I guess one of the biggest things that we were told many years ago is when you do cross the border, be careful. You're not trying to educate a immigration agent. One word answers, be kind, smile. Can you add anything to that?
Yes. Be honest. Never lie to CBP officers. And like you said, stay calm. Don't argue. Don't interfere. Understand that they have the authority to inspect your devices. Politeness, calmness, honesty.
Now, what about children when you're traveling across the border? Now, we don't have young children, but our daughter has a couple of three grandsons. But when they travel, are those kids issued I-94s as well, or is it just the parents that are issued I-94s?
I believe, I would have to double check. I don't have this memorized. I've never checked that. It's a very good question. There's two things to respond to that. One is that since the I-94s are registered via the passport, I can only suspect, and I've never checked, that it would be to the child. Secondly, the registration requirement is for everyone. It's you, your partner, your children. And when the kids turn 14, they need to go re-register. If you're physically in the States and 30 days have passed and the kid turns 14, they need to somehow re-register so that they have their own proof of their own registration.
Now, what about all this that's going on right now in the media? Is it bad, or is it overly hyped, or do you find that it's just one of those things that people might be taking this too far or worrying too much about it?
Well, the media has to get our attention, so they have. This is always the case, right? That the media is always going to take the most alarming cases and bring them to our attention. I mean, for the typical Canadian snowbird, there shouldn't be any issues. As you said, you've been traveling back and forth. Nobody's asked for your computer or your phone. I can't really comment because things are so extreme currently with the new administration. I can't say anything to I don't want to minimize what's going on. I don't want to minimize it because it is extreme. And I didn't get to give my Leonard Nimoy quote yet, but Leonard Nimoy is one of my favorite. He was one of, may his memory be for a blessing. He passed away in 2015. And he said, I'll quote him, "My folks came to the U.S. as immigrants, aliens, and became citizens." And then, of course, he starred in the original Star Trek, and he said, "I was born in Boston, a citizen, went to Hollywood, and became an alien."
Yeah,
I say anything can happen. Let's just maintain our friendships and our connections across the border as individuals as best as we can, and navigate our lives as best as we can, and hope and pray for the best.
Well, the whole purpose of this podcast and the Snowbird US Day Tracker app and the Canada Physical Presence Tracker app that we developed the sole purpose was to connect these snowbirds with people like yourself and have those resources available. I tell everybody that, when you get a chance, when this podcast does go out on Spotify and our friends down in Seattle that do all the editing and put the package together, pass this podcast on to your friends, because Julia has been a great resource for us. And we want to make sure that I'm not telling you to put Julia's number on your speed dial, but I kind of am. At least her contact information, because she's one of those people that we rely on to help the snowbirds out there. And even all those Canadians that are moving home. And we're seeing a lot of it on the wealth management side. There is a lot of Canadians that want to come home. Either they've married an American, married a Canadian. They want to move up here because they have that opportunity. But we used to say it was busy on both sides of the border. But right now we're seeing more Canadians coming home than we ever have. So we know that we've done our job to connect people with the right people. But on that note, Julia, I thank you for your time. And one of my favorite quotes has always been, "The world is small, be kind to all." So thank you very much for your time today.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you again for listening to the Snowbird Expat Radio Podcast. The best way you can support the podcast is to forward the episode to a friend, and please don't hesitate to like, subscribe, or leave a comment. Now, before you go, let me leave you with one of my favorite quotes. Be kind to all, the world is small.